moment, it's kind of a shadow war, and I really hope it's not going to go much beyond that, but the shadow is pretty menacing. As you say, it's spy ships and it's overflights and it's testing NATO's defences.
Let's begin with efforts from European leaders to find a peace deal for Ukraine. It's been another weekend of shuttle diplomacy ahead, or it's going to be another weekend of shuttle diplomacy ahead for the Prime Minister and other European leaders. Michael Binyon, this feels to me like a hiding to nothing.
It certainly does, and it looks as though the Europeans are going to have very little say in what is the final outcome, nor indeed will Zelensky have much say. I mean, Trump is absolutely determined to push this thing through, and it looks as though Ukraine is going to have to give up some or all of the territory that the Russians are insisting on, which is, I mean, it's a dreadful irony. They've lost thousands of people. They've been fighting for almost 4 years, and this is the outcome. And you sort of think, well, what was it all about?
I mean, I cannot believe for a minute that even if some peace agreement is signed, well, I mean, can't even believe I'm using the phrase I can't believe in a minute. If a peace agreement is signed, Putin will break it as soon as he can. And Trump, Alice, will blame Ukraine for any breach in the ceasefire. I mean, this is Ukraine being handed the hospital pass of peace proposals.
Yeah, exactly. This doesn't seem like a peace agreement. This sounds like a surrender agreement. And as you know, if you say to strong men that aggression wins, well, they don't stop there. And I think that you can say that Trump will lay the blame on Ukraine, but I think really where he lays the blame is Europe for being complacent, for not funding our defense properly, and for allowing this to happen. I mean, I think there have been various instances, if you think about the run up to this, say the Skripal poisonings, for example. Why didn't we have a much more aggressive response to that when this was, a murder on our own soil? It seems like we've allowed this to happen. And yeah, it's quite a scary moment, I think.
I think you're right, Alice, and it kind of leads me to think two thoughts. The first is that I find myself really genuinely depressed by what is happening. I do feel kind of like it's the 1930s and that we are watching the slow drumbeat to war, and that is personally affecting me emotionally. I don't want to overdo it, but it is. And the second thing is exactly what Alice said about Skripal. I mean, we did expel, obviously, lots of Russian diplomats, but what do we do? What is the code of conduct, as it were, when you've got these Russian spy ships monitoring our cables and you've got this incredible shadow war going on, Michael? Because if we do anything aggressive back to the Russians, they'll use it as an excuse, say, this is an unprovoked attack by the British, etc.
Yes, of course they will. And of course, the NATO chief, Mark Rutte, has just said that NATO must prepare for a war with Russia. I mean, that sounds pretty apocalyptic, and that is.
But
really,
he's right.
Well, yes, I think what he really means is Europe must get its act together in terms of spending and defence and preparedness and willingness to think about what tactics they could or should use. I don't actually think he's saying we should get ready to actually start open hostilities. But of course, at the moment, it's kind of a shadow war, and I really hope it's not going to go much beyond that, but the shadow is pretty menacing. As you say, it's spy ships and it's overflights and it's testing NATO's defences and all that sort of thing. Now, if there is a so-called peace deal, I mean, if there's a settlement and the fighting stops in Ukraine, maybe the provocations to that extent might dial down, because then Putin has other things to think about, namely how he then deals with Ukraine. I don't think he will necessarily get ready for further invasion, because that would be very costly to the Russians, and it would mean that there would be guerrilla warfare all over Ukraine for the rest of the time the Russians are there. What he will then do is make sure that Zelensky is chucked out. There will be new elections there. He'll have a patsy in place, somebody who's very friendly to Moscow, and in fact he will then have achieved what he wants, which is a sort of client state on his doorstep, which is what the point of it was right from the beginning.
That's an extremely good point, Michael, which had never occurred to me, of course, that if there is a peace, it won't simply be Russia regrouping militarily. It'll be Russia preparing, as it were, to take over Ukraine by civic means, that he'll oust Zelensky and rig an election. That sounds very plausible, Alice. Maybe we should hold back from sinking Russian trawlers and just see what happens in Ukraine first.
I mean, I think that's a good point, but I think if you look at the terms of the deal, there's going to be some sort of American-Russian economic pact where they're kind of extracting profits from Ukraine. So perhaps that is some sort of a bulwark against Russian incursion. But I just don't know. I mean, as you say, Ed, I'm sorry to hear that it's upsetting you emotionally. I feel the same way. I feel like, in fact, we are already at war with Russia in terms of in cyber attacks, in terms of these incursions into our airspace. It feels like, I suppose, the sort of the idea that there was the idea of the West as a sort of moral force for good seems to have been abandoned, particularly by Trump, and he wants to rework the global picture in a way that's purely economic and to America's advantage, just to get the best possible extractive deal he can out of weaker nations.
It's so sort of grotesque to watch this happening in a real time. And I guess it's a wake-up call for all of us about how much we have been dependent on America. I mean, that is the only, I wouldn't call it a silver lining, but that is the kind of robust argument that we've got to get our act together. Let's talk about this US national security strategy, which has been leaked, although the Trump administration denies that it's true. It's appalling, apparently calling for the decoupling of the EU from Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland. I'm quite tempted to call their bluff and start moves to oust Hungary from the EU. See how they like it, Michael.
Well, indeed. Well, why don't we try ousting California from the United States as well, or some other large state? I mean, it's just, frankly, a fantasy world. And what are they thinking? It's not up to the Americans to say who are members of the EU and who are not. Yes, Hungary has been a very difficult member and probably either will oust itself or will sort of be a non-participant at some point. It depends how things develop. But the idea that the Americans have a right to dictate how Europe sets its own political parameters, you think, what's going on? What is all this? It's all to do with the anger at what they see as a kind of liberal conspiracy that rules Europe and which they feel is influencing American thinking, and that this liberalism, which they think is degenerate, has been the target of attack by the US administration for some time. I mean, Vance in Munich last year had a real go at the Europeans. He had censorship and this, that, and the other. But it's because they think that they're basically kind of woke, wet liberals.
I know, it drives me absolutely nuts. I mean, we're rich, we're democratic, we're innovative. I'm sick and tired of the Americans taking a pop at Europe, Alice.
I completely agree with what you say, and I agree with everything Michael said. I think what I found astonishing in this document was that it talks about the civilizational erasure of the West thanks to mass migration. The civilizational erasure is thanks to America decoupling itself, as you say, from Europe, trying to push us around and tell us what to do, and breaking that kind of post-war Western consensus that we had. If you think back to the era of Reagan and Thatcher, a kind of moral crusade against communism, that's the civilization that we tried to build in the post-war era, and that is what America is destroying. I completely agree. I think that the European response should be much more muscular. We need to stand up for ourselves.